Welcome back. In this training video, we'll be looking at how you can successfully sell a story to the media and present it in the best way during an interview. So first, what makes a good news story? It's something current, unusual, something people care about. Here are 5 things to consider. Timing. Is it new? Has it just happened? News moves fast and the media has an appetite for the latest topics and talking points. Significance. Use the so what test. Why do we care about the story? How many people are affected by it? Proximity. How close are people geographically or emotionally to the story? The closer to home, the more people care. Prominence. Famous people do get more news coverage. So if you break your arm, it's not news. If the king does, it's a major news story. And human interest. These are a special case and don't follow the same rules as other news stories, as they don't date as quickly, don't affect as many people, and it may not matter where in the world they happen. They appeal to our emotions. They're often sad, amusing, or heartwarming. A good recent example of a story that started as a relatively small human interest story is Captain Tom's Walk, you may remember. So let's say that you've got something you want to shout about. How might you pitch that story to the media? In your case, it's more than likely you'd go through your sports communications or press team, who are experienced at writing press releases and reaching out to mainstream media. But there's a lot of scope for you to do this yourself using social media and tagging relevant hashtags and media outlets, influencers and significant people in your field so that your posts are widely shared. This may well result in them being picked up by mainstream media. I'm sure you're all very social media literate, so I won't teach you to suck eggs. But I would stress a note of caution when it comes to social media, that it could invite negative engagement and very quickly have an impact on your reputation and potentially your future career. I'd advise that anything potentially controversial you want to announce or say on social media is first approved by your sports communications or press team. The key thing to remember about the media when you're reaching out to them is that most journalists have very short attention spans and are time poor. So unlike most stories where you start at the beginning and work your way through to the end, media stories operate on an inverted pyramid. That's to say you start at the punchline at the end of the story with the most newsworthy information first. What happened to who, where, when, what, why and how. More important details come next in the body of the story, and finally any wider general or background information. Press releases also work to this structure to capture the journalist's attention in the top few lines. So let's say you've sold your story, BBC Breakfast is interested and wants to come and film a short pre-recorded report with you in it. Let's say you've decided to speak out about Red S and the impact of professional sportspersons' lifestyle on fertility. A story like this may well not be an on-the-day news story, as it's more of a feature, but nevertheless the media will be working to a fairly tight deadline of a few days. If there was a news line attached to the story, for example, new figures from a recent study, then the media may want to run it the same day before other news outlets cover it and the stats become old news. In this instance, a reporter would film and edit a story for broadcast the same day, which would involve filming various elements that fit together to tell the story like a jigsaw puzzle. Let's watch an example of a sports news story and notice how it's put together and what elements it involves.
The World Swimming Championships getting underway in Budapest. But just hours earlier in the same city, the sport's governing body had made a crucial decision. Members of FINA voted to effectively bar any trans woman who has gone through male puberty from competing in women's events.
We have to protect the rights of all our athletes to compete. But we also have to protect competitive fairness at our events, especially women's competition.
The policy has been prompted by swimmers such as American Leah Thomas, the first known transgender swimmer to win a US National College title. Thomas will now not be eligible to compete in women's events at the World Championships or the Olympics. Former Olympic swimmer and campaigner Sharon Davies has welcomed it.
I'm really proud of my association to be the first to come forward and actually base their rules on proved science. You know, we've been asking for that for 5 years now. All we've ever wanted is to have fair sport for females.
It's an incredibly divisive subject.
Keep sports, seatbelt set.
The debate has led to other sports examining their policies, including World Cycling's governing body, who will tighten their rules. It follows trans athlete Emily Bridges' failed attempt to compete in the women's category. FINA say they will also create an open category, but those disappointed with today's changes say that's scant consolation.
If trans women have undergone an appropriate period of testosterone suppression, then their advantages will be mitigated to the point where we can have meaningful competition between trans women and cis women.
Fairness and inclusion are the cornerstones of sport, but this issue has seen the two collide. And when feelings run as deep as this, affecting so many, they won't dissipate anytime soon. Jane Goodall, BBC News.
In any TV report, you'd expect to find relevant shots to the story. In this case, transgender athletes and swimming. This is sometimes referred to as B-roll. TV reports make use of so-called natural sound found in the footage, often referred to as upshot. It may be the sound of an activity like swimming, or somebody talking, like this clip of the FINA president speaking at the press conference. He's used in this case almost like an interview clip. Finally, there will be interview clips in the report representing all sides of the story, as we saw in this report with the Olympic silver medalist and the transgender author. Interviewees may be case studies, i.e. someone with personal experience related to the story, or an expert on the topic. In your story, you'd be classed as the case study element. Others may include a graphic with stats, an interview with a medical expert, and various shots of female athletes. Most TV reports are only 2 to 3 minutes in length, so your interview, which could take half an hour or more to film, would be cut down to probably no more than 30 seconds. Crucially, you won't know or have any control over which 30 seconds the journalist chooses to use. As I mentioned, journalists are time poor, so they won't have long to select which part of your interview they want to use. Many journalists decide during the interview which bits they like, and in some cases they may stop the interview once they feel they've got what they need. Equally, the interview may drag on until they feel they've got what they came for. In other words, you don't have editorial control of the interview. However, you can take control of the interview to make sure the viewer hears what you want them to. The best way to do this is to go back to your strategic thinking. Hone your 2 or 3 key messages and make sure you repeat them throughout the interview at every opportunity, regardless of the question asked. It's very rare that the journalist will record and broadcast their question as part of the interview unless there's a specific purpose, for example, showing them asking the Prime Minister a tough question. So your answer will be self-contained. It's therefore good practice not to start your answer with yes or no, for example, but to build the question into your answer. For example, in response to the question, do you think there should be more awareness of Red S? You might start your answer with, I do think more should be done to raise awareness about Red S. In an emotive interview where you're sharing a personal story, it may not be relevant or appropriate to push your key messaging. These sorts of interviews tend to form a feature news story, which have a longer lead time till broadcast, and your interview will be given much longer in the report. Indeed, it may form the whole report. Let's watch an example.
M&D is a part of our life, but I don't want M&D to take over our lives.
The average life expectancy is between 1 and 3 years, so I'm here over that, still living, still smiling.
I'm not giving in out till my last breath. Too many reasons to live.
I know this is a club that you didn't ever want to join, and a team you didn't ever want to be on. But I really appreciate the fact that you're going to take some time to talk to us about it, because we know that generally, I hope I'm not generalising too much, that men don't talk about illness, don't talk about how they feel. So how much does it help to sit here and to be able to talk to each other today?
It's through in unfortunate circumstances that we've come together, and obviously it is unfortunate, but it's something which we need to turn into a positive. And I think just by being here today and talking about what we're going through and talking about MND and how devastating a disease it is, it's important that we raise that awareness and get that message out there.
As we saw from that extract from BBC Breakfast's MND report with Doddy Weir, Rob Burrows and Stephen Darby, feature stories tend to be made up entirely of shots and interview clips of the case study or case studies who the story is about. Although you don't have editorial control in a pre-recorded interview, you do have the ability to stop and start the interview and repeat any answers as you need. Unless you're responding to a crisis situation, which we'll look at in the final part of the course, the journalist is not trying to grill you. They want to get the best out of the interview just as much as you, so they have a nice, usable bit of TV to broadcast. If you're asked a question you can't or don't want to answer, you can say so. The interview isn't being broadcast live. If, for example, you become emotional during an interview or you need to pause to think or get a drink, you can. Most journalists will respect your wishes if you ask for a certain answer not to be used because they want to maintain a good relationship with you, although this is at their discretion. It's much easier to do this at the time of the interview than retrospectively, when the media outlet now effectively owns the material. Remember, most of the time you're far more knowledgeable about the subject you're talking about than the journalist. So don't be afraid to correct them as necessary to get the facts of the story straight. You can also steer the conversation by hooking the interviewer. You can do this by introducing interesting information which invites a follow-up question that leads directly to what you want to say. For example, by saying, "That's just one of the important reasons," invites the interviewer to ask, "Well, what are the others?" Remember, you can influence which part of the interview is used by repeating your key messages in every answer and keeping your answers to no more than 30 seconds so they don't get cut. Before we finish, let's recap what we've learnt in this module. There are 5 factors that make a newsworthy story: timing, significance, proximity, prominence, and human interest. Media stories operate on an inverted pyramid, where you start with the punchline, in other words, the most interesting facts, and add more detail later. News reports tend to be 2 to 3 minutes in length, made up of roughly 30-second interview clips, shots, and often a graphic. Interviewees often include a case study and an expert on the subject. You don't have editorial control in a pre-recorded interview, but to ensure the audience hears your key messages, repeat them in every answer. Try to include the question in the start of your answer so it's self-contained, and avoid starting with yes, no, or as I've said. You can encourage the journalist to ask questions you want to answer using the hooking technique, where you drop in a small amount of interesting information which encourages a follow-up question. Well, that brings us to the end of the second part of this media training course. In the final part, we'll look at crisis management and how you can get the best out of even the toughest of interviews. See you then.